The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Millfield Cemetery as Robert Wilson stepped out of his rental car. 5 years had passed since he'd last set foot in this town, and he hadn't planned on ever coming back. But death had a way of disrupting even the most determined plans. His mother's passing had dragged him back to the place he'd tried so hard to forget. Robert adjusted his tie and walked slowly between the rows of headstones. The funeral had ended an hour ago, but he couldn't bring himself to leave just yet. Most people had quickly dispersed after offering mechanical condolences. Old neighbors and family friends who once welcomed him warmly now kept their distance, their eyes avoiding his. He understood why. His departure after his son's funeral had left wounds that time hadn't healed. "I thought you might still be here," said a voice behind him. Robert turned to see Pastor Thompson, now with more gray in his beard than he remembered. "Just saying my final goodbyes," Robert replied, his voice rougher than he intended. The pastor nodded. "Your mother was a good woman. Came here every week without fail, rain or shine." Robert frowned. "To her husband's grave?" "Yes, and to your boys too," Pastor Thompson said, then seemed to catch himself. "I'm sorry to bring that up." Robert felt the familiar tightness in his chest whenever someone mentioned Michael. His son had been only 17 when they found him. The memory still burned like it happened yesterday. The phone call in the middle of the night, the rush to the hospital, the doctor's face telling him everything before a single word was spoken. "It's fine," Robert lied. Nothing about losing his son would ever be fine. The pastor excused himself with a gentle pat on Robert's shoulder, leaving him alone again. Robert stood at his mother's fresh grave, the dirt still loose. Almost without thinking, his eyes drifted 2 plots over where his son's headstone stood. Something wasn't right. Robert walked closer, puzzled. The headstone looked different than he remembered, cleaner somehow. And there, perfectly placed against the gray marble, sat a bouquet of blue flowers. Not just any flowers, hydrangeas. The exact shade of blue that Michael had always loved. The color of his bedroom walls, his favorite hoodie, the wallpaper on his computer. Robert knelt down, touching the petals gently. They were fresh, couldn't have been here more than a day. Beautiful flowers, aren't they? Robert looked up to see an older man in work clothes leaning on a shovel nearby. "Yes," Robert managed. "Do you know who put them here?" The groundskeeper shrugged. "Can't say for sure today, but those same blue flowers have been showing up every Friday for years now. 5 years, I'd say. Never missed a week. 5 years. Exactly since Michael's funeral." Robert felt his heart rate quicken. "Every week? The same flowers?" "Like clockwork," the groundskeeper nodded. "Sometimes I see an older lady putting them there. Figured it was a grandmother or something." Robert stood up slowly, his knees cracking. "My mother," he whispered. That makes sense. Sorry for your loss, by the way. Heard about Mrs. Wilson's passing." Robert barely heard him. His mind was racing. Why would his mother bring the same flowers every week for 5 years? She'd never mentioned it in their phone calls. And there was something else that bothered him. The headstone just didn't look right. He ran his fingers over the engraved letters of his son's name. The stone felt newer than it should. The date of birth, the date of death, the small quote at the bottom, "Forever in our hearts." It was all correct, but something felt off. Robert pulled out his phone and scrolled through old photos. There, a picture from the funeral. He zoomed in on the headstone in the background and compared it to what stood before him now. The quote was different. The original had read, "Gone too soon." Someone had replaced his son's headstone. Robert felt a chill run through him despite the warm spring air. He looked around the cemetery, suddenly feeling watched. The streets of Millfield had seemed normal when he drove in yesterday, but nothing felt normal now. As he walked back to his car, the questions swirled in his mind. Why would someone change the headstone? What did his mother know? And who had brought flowers today when his mother was no longer alive to do so? One thing was certain. The peaceful burial he thought his son had been given was hiding something. Something people in this town didn't want him to discover. Robert started the car but didn't drive away immediately. Instead, he pulled out the EAO key to his mother's house, the house he'd grown up in, the house where Michael had spent his childhood summers. If answers existed, that's where he would start looking. What began as a reluctant return for a funeral was quickly becoming something else entirely, the beginning of a search for the truth everyone had hidden from him. Robert pushed open the creaky front door of his mother's house. A wave of memories hit him, stronger than he expected. Nothing had changed much. The worn couch still faced the old TV. Family photos still lined the hallway walls. The house smelled of lemon polish and the faint scent of his mother's favorite, bread. She must have baked before she fell ill. He set his bag down and walked through the living room, his footsteps echoing in the empty house. On the mantel, a row of photos caught his eye. Michael as a toddler, Michael on his first bike, Michael in his baseball uniform. And then the last one. Michael at 16, just months before he died. His son smiled at the camera, unaware of how little time he had left. Robert picked up the photo, his thumb brushing over his son's face. The memory of that terrible night came rushing back, unstoppable as a flood. He had been working late at the office when the phone rang. A party at the Wilson house, the neighbor had said, some kids making noise. Robert hadn't been worried. Michael was a good kid, never in trouble. He figured he'd simply forgot to mention having friends over. But when Robert got home, police, cars were parked outside. Blue and red lights flashed across the lawn. And then the officer's words that changed everything. "I'm sorry, sir. We found your son unresponsive upstairs. They said it was drugs. An accidental overdose. Michael and some friends experimenting. A bad batch, a terrible mistake." Robert had never believed it. Not his son. Not the straight-A student who lectured. His friends about staying clean, whose biggest rebellion was staying up too late playing video games. But the evidence was there. The pill bottle, the toxicology report, the statements from frightened teenagers who'd fled the scene. "It doesn't make sense," he whispered to the empty room, just as he had whispered it every day for months after the funeral. He remembered the rage that followed. How he'd screamed at the detective who closed the case too quickly. How he'd accused Michael's friends of lying. How he'd even blamed his wife, Lisa, for not being home that night. Their marriage had already been shaky, but his grief had shattered what little remained. 6 months after burying their son, Lisa had asked for a divorce. Robert couldn't blame her. He'd been impossible to live with, consumed by questions no one wanted to answer. Robert set the photo down and walked into the kitchen. He opened the fridge, mostly empty except for some basic supplies. His mother must have known she wouldn't be coming home from the hospital. He made himself a simple sandwich, not really hungry but needing something to do with his hands. As he ate, he noticed his mother's reading glasses on the kitchen table, resting on top of a worn leather-bound book, her journal. His mother had kept one for as long as he could remember. Robert hesitated before picking it up. It felt like intruding on her privacy. But she was gone now, and something told him he needed to see what was inside. He opened to a random page from about 4 years ago. Visited Michael again today. The blue flowers are getting expensive, but they were his favorite. I can't stop thinking about what Tom told me. If Robert knew what really happened that night. No, I made a promise to protect him. Some truths are too dangerous. Robert's hand trembled. He flipped to another entry, this one from just 3 months ago. The guilt eats at me every day. Keeping this secret from my own son feels wrong. But if I tell Robert what I've learned, what will he do? The people involved are powerful. They've made it clear what happens to those who talk. But how long can this go on? How do I take this to my grave? Robert felt his heartbeat in his ears. He quickly flipped to the last entry dated just 2 weeks ago. I don't have much time left. The doctor's face said what his words didn't. I've arranged everything. My funeral, my will. But Michael's truth remains buried. I've left the key. In the blue box where we used to keep his baby shoes. If Robert ever comes home, he'll know what to do with it. I pray he forgives me for protecting him from the truth all these years." Robert closed the journal, his sandwich forgotten. He went to the hallway closet where his mother kept mementos and family keepsakes. On the top shelf behind old photo albums, he found it, a dusty blue box he remembered from his childhood. Inside was a small key and a note in his mother's handwriting. "Storage Unit, Narao 47, Wilson Road. The truth about Michael is there. Be careful who you trust." Robert stared at the key, a chill running down his spine. After 5 years of questions without answers, he finally had somewhere to start looking. The drive to Lisa's new house took Robert through familiar streets that now felt like they belonged to a different life. 5 years had changed Millfield in small ways. A new traffic light here, a renovated storefront there. He gripped the steering wheel tighter as he turned onto Oak Street, where his ex-wife now lived with her new husband. The 2-story house with blue shutters looked nothing like the home they had shared. Robert sat in his car for a moment, gathering courage. The key to the storage unit felt heavy in his pocket. He needed answers before he went there, and Lisa was the only person he could still trust, or at least he hoped he could. Robert knocked on the front door, his heart pounding. When it opened, Lisa stood there, her hair shorter than he remembered. Her eyes widened with surprise. "Robert," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw you at the funeral but didn't get a chance to." "I know. It's been a long time." He shifted awkwardly on his feet. "Can we talk?" Lisa glanced behind her, then stepped onto the porch, pulling the door nearly closed. "Tim's on a work call. We can talk out here." Robert nodded, noticing how she seemed nervous, her fingers fidgeting, with the hem of her sweater. "Mom left me her journal," he said, getting straight to the point. "She wrote some strange things about Michael, about the night he died." Lisa's face paled. "Your mother always had an active imagination." Was it imagination when she wrote about what really happened that night? About promises to protect me? About powerful people making it clear what happens to those who talk? Robert kept his voice low, but couldn't hide the intensity. Lisa looked around, as if checking whether anyone could hear them. "Please, Robert, it's been 5 years. We've all moved on. You should too." "Moved on?" "Our son died, Lisa. And now I find out everyone's been hiding something about it." "You need to let this go," she said, her eyes suddenly filling with tears. "For everyone's sake." "What are you afraid of?" Robert asked, stepping closer. "Who are you protecting?" Lisa looked away. "You didn't stay, Robert. You left town. You have no idea what it's been like here." "Then tell me." The front door opened wider, and a tall man appeared. "Everything okay? Out here, honey?" His tone was pleasant, but his eyes were cold as they assessed Robert. "Everything's fine, Tim. Robert was just leaving." Lisa's voice trembled slightly. Robert understood he wouldn't get anything more from her now. "I'll see you around, Lisa," he said, turning to leave. As he walked back to his car, he heard the door close firmly behind him. Back in his car, Robert hit the steering wheel in frustration. Whatever truth was buried in Millfield, the fear surrounding it was very real. As he drove back toward his mother's house, Robert noticed a car following him. A few random turns confirmed his suspicion. Someone was definitely tailing him. Instead of heading home, he drove to the town diner, a place that had existed since his childhood. Inside, he ordered coffee and sat at a corner booth. The diner was nearly empty, save for an elderly man nursing a cup of tea at the counter. Robert recognized him as George Wilson, no relation despite sharing the same last name, who had worked as the coroner's assistant for decades. After a few minutes, the old man got up slowly and, to Robert's surprise, made his way to his booth. "Mind if I sit?" George asked, his voice raspy from years of smoking. Robert gestured to the empty seat across from him. "Be my guest." George glanced around before leaning forward. "I heard you were back in town, asking questions about your boy." Robert stared at him. "News travels fast. Small town," George said with a shrug. "Look, I don't have much time. Doctor says the cancer's spread. Got maybe a month left. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. Been carrying this for 5 years, waiting for you to come back. Robert looked at the envelope. What is it? The real autopsy report on your son, not the one they filed officially. George's hands shook as he took a sip of his tea. I made a copy before they changed everything. Never had the guts to do anything with it. But now, he gestured to himself. Not much they can do to me anymore, is there? Robert carefully opened the envelope and scanned the document inside. His blood ran cold. The report mentioned bruising, patterns inconsistent with an overdose, signs of a struggle, evidence that had been collected but mysteriously disappeared from the official record. This says Michael was... I'm not saying another word. George cut him off, standing up with effort. But if I were you, I'd look into why Chief Thompson's son and his friends all left town within months of your boy's death. He leaned closer. And I'd be very careful who knows you're doing it. As George shuffled away, Robert stared at the report in his hands. The truth was beginning to surface, and it was darker than he had imagined. The storage unit was at the edge of town, a place Robert had passed 100 times without ever noticing. Unit 247 was at the far end of the lot, away from the road. Robert glanced around to make sure he wasn't followed, before unlocking the padlock with his mother's key. The door rolled up with a metallic groan. Inside, a single bare bulb lit up when Robert pulled the chain. The small space contained just a few boxes and an old desk. The handwriting on the boxes was his mother's, Michael's things. Robert opened the first box, finding photo albums, school awards, and baseball trophies. Normal keepsakes from a life cut short. The second box held clothes. Michael's favorite jacket, a few t-shirts, the sneakers he was wearing the night he died. His mother had kept everything, but it was what Robert found in the desk drawer that made his hands shake, a thick folder labeled The Truth and a small digital voice recorder. He pressed play on the recorder. His mother's voice filled the silent storage unit. Robert, if you're listening to this, then I'm gone, and you've finally come home. I'm sorry I kept this from you. After Michael died and you left town, I started noticing things that didn't add up. People avoiding eye contact, conversations stopping when I entered a room. Then one day, while volunteering at the school library, I overheard 2 of Michael's old friends talking. They mentioned something about what really happened at the creek the night before Michael was found. I started digging, careful not to draw attention. What I found, well, it's all in this folder. Be careful, son. The people involved are watching. The recording ended. Robert opened the folder, finding newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and printed emails his mother had collected. One newspaper article caught his eye. A small piece about 3 local teens who had received, surprise, scholarships to out-of-state schools just months after Michael's death. The names matched the boys Michael used to hang out with. Robert read through his mother's notes, piecing together her theory. Michael and his friends had witnessed something at Willow Creek the night before he died. Something involving the son of Police Chief Thompson and the mayor's family. His mother had tracked down phone records showing dozens of calls between these boys in the hours before Michael was found dead. Robert checked his watch. It was nearly 7 p.m. If he was going to find these former friends of Michael's, he needed to work fast. His mother's notes included an address for one of them, Peter Clark, who now lived in Riverdale just 30 minutes away. The drive to Riverdale gave Robert time to think. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was still blurry, around the edges. Why would powerful people in town cover up the truth about a teenager's death? What had Michael seen or known that made him dangerous? Peter's apartment was in a modest complex on the outskirts of Riverdale. Robert parked across the street and waited, unsure what to say when he saw the young man who had once been his son's best friend. 20 minutes later, a car pulled into the parking lot. A young man with a messenger bag got out. Though it had been years, Robert recognized Peter immediately. He was taller now, his boyish features hardened into those of a man in his mid-20s. Robert got out of his car. Peter? The young man froze, then slowly turned. Mr. Wilson? His face went pale. What are you doing here? I need to talk to you about Michael. Peter glanced nervously around the parking lot. I can't. You shouldn't be here. 5 years, Peter. It's been 5 years since my son died, and I just found out the official story is a lie. Peter's hands were shaking as he fumbled with his keys. Please, just go. Tell me what happened that night. What did you boys see at the creek? Peter dropped his keys. When he bent to pick them up, Robert noticed a long scar running down the side of his neck, a scar that hadn't been there when Peter was a teenager. They'll kill me if I talk to you, Peter whispered, finally meeting Robert's eyes. They already tried once. Who? Who tried to kill you? The same people who killed Michael. Peter's voice broke. Look, I can't talk here. They watch me. They've been watching all of us. Then where? Peter thought for a moment. Tomorrow. The diner in Carroll County, 2 towns over. 10 a.m. Come alone. He unlocked his door quickly. And Mr. Wilson, be careful. These people, they own this whole area. Police, judges, newspapers. They can make anyone disappear. As Peter hurried inside, Robert stood in the darkening parking lot, a chill running through him that had nothing to do with the evening air. The truth about his son's death was within reach, but getting to it might cost him everything. Robert barely slept that night. His mind kept replaying Peter's words. The same people who killed Michael. Not an overdose. Not an accident. Killed. The word echoed in his head as he drove to Carroll County the next morning. The diner was off the highway, a place where truckers stopped for coffee and locals came for cheap breakfast. Robert arrived 15 minutes early and chose a booth with a clear view of the entrance. He ordered coffee and waited, checking his watch every few minutes. 10 o'clock came and went. By 10:30, Robert's stomach was in knots. Had Peter changed his mind, or worse, had something happened to him? At 10:45, just as Robert was about to leave, the door opened. It wasn't Peter who walked in, but Police Chief Thompson, the same man who had led the investigation into Michael's death 5 years ago. The chief spotted Robert and walked directly to his booth. Mind if I join you? He asked, though he was already sliding into the seat across from Robert. Where's Peter? Robert demanded. Chief Thompson sighed. Peter Clark won't be joining you today or any day. He left town this morning, very suddenly. Robert felt a chill down his spine. What did you do to him? Nothing. Just reminded him of certain agreements. The chief flagged down a waitress and ordered coffee. You've been stirring up old business, Robert, making people nervous. People who covered up what really happened to my son. Thompson's face remained neutral, but his eyes hardened. Your son overdosed at a party. It was a tragedy, but nothing more. Robert pulled out the autopsy report George had given him and slid it across the table. This says differently. The chief glanced at it without touching it. George always did have trouble letting things go. Cancer's eating his brain, making him confused. He's not confused about the bruises on my son's body, or the signs of a struggle, or the evidence that went missing. Robert leaned forward. What are you hiding, Chief? A long silence stretched between them as the waitress brought Thompson's coffee. After she left, the chief stirred his coffee, slowly, as if carefully choosing his words. You left town, Robert? You ran away when things got hard. Do you have any idea what it takes to keep a place like Millfield running? The sacrifices made so people can sleep soundly at night? Don't you dare lecture me about sacrifices, Robert hissed. My son is dead. And that's a terrible thing. A parent should never have to bury their child. Thompson's voice softened. But digging up the past won't bring him back. It will only cause more pain. I want the truth. The truth? Thompson's mask slipped, anger flashing in his eyes. You couldn't handle the truth. None of you could. That's why we had to protect this town. Protect it from what? Thompson seemed to catch himself. He took a deep breath, composing his features. Go home, Robert. Visit your son's grave. Say your goodbyes. Then leave Millfield and don't come back. Or what? Or you might find yourself in trouble. These roads can be dangerous. Accidents happen. The threat hung in the air between them. Robert felt his hands shaking, but not from fear, from rage. My mother kept records, he bluffed. Everything she found out about Michael's death. I've sent copies to people outside of town. If anything happens to me, everything goes public. A flash of uncertainty crossed the chief's face. You're playing a dangerous game. So are you. Threatening the father of a boy you helped kill. Thompson stood abruptly. I never laid a hand on your son, but you know who did, and you covered it up. Robert stood too, facing the chief. Was it your son? Was that why David Thompson suddenly went to college in California right after Michael died? Or was it the mayor's boy, the one who now runs his daddy's company? The chief's face paled. How did you... I told you. My mother kept records, tracked everyone involved, and now I have those records. Robert took a step closer. I'm going to the state police. Today. With everything. They won't believe you. Maybe not. But they'll have to investigate when I get my son's body exhumed, when they see the real evidence of what happened to him. Something in the chief seemed to crumble. The confident lawman was replaced by an aging, frightened man. You have no idea what you're about to unleash, he whispered. We did what we had to do. No, Robert said firmly. You did what was easy. What protected the powerful. Now it's time for the truth. As Robert walked out of the diner, leaving the chief behind, he felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Purpose. The road ahead would be dangerous, but for the first time since his son died, Robert knew exactly what he needed to do. Dark clouds gathered above Millfield Cemetery as workers set up equipment around Michael's grave. Robert stood a short distance away, his hands deep in his pockets, watching as the court-ordered exhumation began. It had taken a week of fighting, through red tape, calls to the state police, and meetings with a district attorney from outside the county. But finally, the truth would be uncovered. A small crowd had gathered near the cemetery gates. Robert recognized some faces, neighbors, old friends, people who had come to Michael's funeral 5 years ago. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. News traveled fast in Millfield, and everyone knew what was happening today. Detective Carson from the state police stood beside Robert. She was in her 40s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Are you sure you want to be here for this? She asked quietly. Robert nodded. I need to see it with my own eyes. You understand that after 5 years. She didn't finish the sentence, but Robert knew what she meant. The body would not be as he remembered his son. I understand. The backhoe operator started the engine. The sound cut through the morning air as the machine began carefully removing earth from above the grave. Robert felt each scoop of dirt like a physical blow, but he stood firm. Rain began to fall, lightly at first, then harder. Through the drizzle, Robert spotted Lisa standing, under a tree, her face pale. Their eyes met briefly before she looked away. He also noticed Chief Thompson watching from his police cruiser parked across the street. The mayor was conspicuously absent. After nearly an hour, the workers reached the coffin. 2 men jumped down, into the hole with ropes and straps. Detective Carson moved closer. This is it, she said. Last chance to step away. No, Robert said firmly. I'm staying. The workers secured the straps around the coffin and signaled to their colleagues. Slowly, the dark wood box that had held Robert's son for 5 years rose from the earth. They placed it on a tarp spread out on the wet grass. The funeral director who had handled Michael's service approached with tools to open the sealed coffin. The small crowd drew closer despite the rain. Detective Carson ordered them to maintain their distance, establishing a perimeter with yellow police tape. Mr. Wilson, the funeral director said, "Are you ready?" Robert took a deep breath and nodded. The sound of the seals breaking seemed unnaturally loud in the cemetery. Detective Carson, a forensic technician, and the county medical examiner gathered. Close as the lid was carefully lifted, a collective gasp rose from the onlookers. The coffin wasn't empty, but it didn't contain Michael's body. Instead, it was filled with sandbags arranged roughly in the shape of a human form. "What the hell?" Detective Carson exclaimed, dropping her professional demeanor for a moment. Robert stared in disbelief. "Where is my son?" His voice came out, as a whisper then rose to a shout. "Where is my son?" He turned toward Chief Thompson, who was now quickly getting back into his cruiser. But before the chief could drive away, state police officers blocked his vehicle. The forensic technician examined the inside of the coffin carefully. "These sandbags have been here since the burial," she said. "The coffin was never disturbed after it was put in the ground." Robert's mind raced. Someone had removed Michael's body before the funeral, before the burial, which meant the funeral home, he said suddenly. They must have been part of it. Detective Carson was already on her radio, calling for officers to secure the local funeral home and bring in the director for questioning. The current scene was now a crime scene, with evidence technicians taking photos and samples. Through the crowd, Robert spotted Lisa hurrying away. He pushed past officers and caught up to her at the cemetery gates. "Did you know?" he demanded, grabbing her arm. "Did you know our son wasn't in there?" Tears streamed down Lisa's face, mixing with the rain. "I didn't know he wasn't in the coffin," she said, her voice breaking. "But I knew they were hiding something. They threatened our family, Robert. Said they'd hurt our daughter next if I ever told what I overheard that night." "What did you hear?" Lisa looked over her shoulder fearfully. "The mayor's son confessing. He was drunk at our house that night, fighting with Michael. He pushed him too hard. Michael hit his head on the fireplace." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "It was an accident, but the mayor couldn't let his son's future be ruined. So they made it look like a drug overdose. And now I find out they didn't even give us our son to bury." Robert stood in the rain, the truth finally breaking over him like the storm above. But one question remained unanswered. If Michael wasn't in his coffin, where had they hidden his body? 3 months passed like a whirlwind. The small town of Millfield had been turned upside down. State police cars and news vans became a common sight on Main Street. The mayor resigned in disgrace. Chief Thompson was under house arrest awaiting trial. The funeral home director had confessed to his role in the cover-up after just 2 hours of questioning. Robert sat on a park bench watching ducks glide across the town pond. The late summer sun warmed his face as Detective Carson approached and sat beside him. "Just got the final DNA results," she said, handing him a folder. "Thought you might want to see them yourself." Robert opened the folder with trembling hands. The technical language was hard to follow, but the conclusion was clear. The ashes found in an unmarked urn in his mother's attic were indeed Michael's remains. "So it's true," Robert whispered. "Mom knew. From what we've pieced together, your mother discovered the truth about a year after you left town," Carson explained. "She confronted the mayor privately, threatening to expose everything. They struck a deal. She would keep quiet if they gave her Michael's real remains. Why wouldn't she tell me? The letters we found in her safety deposit box explain that. They threatened you, Mr. Wilson. Said if you ever found out there would be consequences. She was protecting you, the only way she knew how." Robert closed the folder. The knowledge that his mother had carried this burden alone for years made his heart ache. And the lake? The flowers? The blue hydrangeas were her way of honoring him. According to her journal, she scattered some of his ashes at the lake every year on his birthday. It was his favorite spot, wasn't it? Robert nodded, remembering how Michael used to spend hours fishing there as a boy. What happens now? The DA is charging the mayor's son with involuntary manslaughter. Chief Thompson and 4 other town officials are being charged with evidence tampering and obstruction of justice. The funeral director is cooperating, so he'll likely get a reduced sentence. Detective Carson looked at him carefully. It won't bring Michael back, but it's justice. The truth is finally out. The truth. After 5 years of lies, the town now knew what had happened that night. Michael had caught the mayor's son and his friends drinking and doing drugs in the Wilson home while Robert and Lisa were away. When Michael threatened to tell their parents, a fight broke out. The mayor's son had pushed Michael, causing him to hit his head on the stone fireplace. Instead of calling for help, they panicked and called the mayor and Chief Thompson, who orchestrated the cover-up. "I've been thinking about what to do next," Robert said. "I can't stay in Millfield, too many memories, but I can't just disappear like I did before either." "What are you thinking?" Robert pulled a brochure from his pocket and handed it to her. "The Michael Wilson Foundation for Truth and Justice, a scholarship fund for students going into law enforcement or journalism. People who will ask hard questions and not look the other way when the powerful break the rules." Detective Carson smiled. He would have been proud of that. Later that afternoon, Robert drove to the lake. He parked where the dirt road ended and walked along the narrow path to the place his mother had described in her journal. There, nestled among the reeds, he found the small stone marker with Michael's name and dates. Robert sat on the ground beside it and opened the small wooden box he'd brought. Inside were the remaining ashes from his mother's attic. With gentle hands, he scattered them over the water, watching as they merged with the gentle waves. "I found the truth, son," he whispered. "I know what happened to you now." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the water, Robert placed a fresh bouquet of blue hydrangeas by the marker. He would return to this spot before he left town for good. But for now, sitting by the water where his son had spent his happiest days, Robert Wilson finally found a measure of peace. In the months that followed, the Michael Wilson Foundation awarded its first scholarships to 3 Millfield High students. The town began the slow process of healing, with new leadership promising transparency and accountability. And on a small college campus across the state, a journalism professor told his students the story of a boy named Michael and how the truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually finds its way to the light.